Let's go.
You're listening to Making Data Simple, where we make the world of data effortless, relevant, and yes, even fun.
Hey folks, Al Martin here. I am glad that you made it. You made it with us again. I'm with Dave Garrison, who is a leader, he's a strategist with over 25 years of experience as a CEO, strategic advisor, independent board member for public and private companies such as Ameritrade, both in the United States and internationally. He also co-founded Garrison Growth in 2013 to help organizations ranging from new startups to major public corporations they get the best possible results from their teams. He also published a book in 2025 called The Buy-in Advantage: Why Employees Stop Caring and How Great Leaders Inspire Everyone to Give Their All. This is like the third time. Well, it's actually the second time we've had Dave on, but the last podcast we did, it was so good, we broke into two different parts. So this will be the third part, I think, in the shortest amount of time I've ever had anybody on the podcast. So I don't know what that gets you, Dave, but you're setting records here some way, somehow. Welcome back. I'm glad you made it.
Al, thank you. I love the conversations, and your questions always cause me to think differently. So thank you.
Well, originally I was like, what am I going to talk about? Because we did talk about a lot of different things, but I do have a ton more questions, man. They keep coming. Hey, before we jump in, the listeners should go back and listen to part 1, part 2. This will be, part 3. But could you give a quick introduction in addition to what I just provided?
Al, the thing that drives me and the thing that interests me is what is it we can do to unlock potential in people? And as leaders, we are so focused every day on what happened in this quarter's sales, how many sales calls do we make this week, how big is the pipeline, all this data. And yet, one of the assets. What's that?
It sounds like my life. Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Well. Yeah.
But interestingly, one of the metrics that we don't really track very well is how are we unlocking potential in our people? And so that's what really drives me. That's what I'm interested in, because, people are data. And yet the data we look at is the data that comes from our laptops or our databases. And people are data. And what they tell us is data that we can use to inform how to be better leaders, if we ask the right questions, much like an LLM, huh?
Let's talk about the buy-in advantage, if you would. Let's tee off of that, if you don't mind. This really goes into why organizations suffer from low employee engagement, lack of genuine buy-in, what you term, I think, the buy-in crisis, driven by generational expectations, global economic uncertainty. And why does it matter? Buy-in leads not only to, or the lack of buy-in, I should say, leads to not only turnover and recruitment costs, lower innovation, weaker execution. But I got to ask you again, and then I'm going to tee off this. What inspired you to write this? What was there a specific moment in your career, or you wake up one day and say, like, I've had enough, I got to write this book? What was it?
It was, frankly, a group of other CEOs that I meet with regularly in a forum that said, why don't you start doing what you love instead of what you're doing to make money? And that kind of threw me for a loop, because I invite them to be really honest with me. And what I realized that I love is watching and working with people to see them achieve things they didn't think was possible. And that is the unlocking potential part of my drive. And then as I started to deal with clients and understand clients and client problems, I'd hear CEOs say things like, man, we've got the right strategy, I've got the right people, but something isn't clicking. What isn't clicking? And the numbers from Gallup come out every single year, and they say, basically, would you recommend this as a place to work? And the net percentage of people that say they would recommend where they are as a place to work drops. It's at a 10-year low. So let me ask you this. How much enthusiasm do you think people bring to the workplace when they say, I wouldn't want a friend here? And it doesn't mean they're not happy. It doesn't mean they don't appreciate the free pizzas on Fridays. They appreciate the free coffee, but they wouldn't recommend a friend to be there, which says they can't give it their all, because in my book, they're not being invited to through no fault of the leader. We've just never trained leaders or set expectations to get people to give their all.
Let me start where you started, where you said, hey, you're meeting with these CEOs. They say, hey, follow your passion, quit trying to make money or whatever. I'm sure you can do a little bit of both. In fact, I was just reading something the other day, and the comment was made is the only people that really say follow your passions are the ones that already made it. Meaning you've got to put in the hard work, and maybe you're you're an accountant, Doesn't sound sexy on top, but pretty soon you become the best accountant ever, and that becomes a passion. And all of a sudden you're passionate about accounting. Does it work that way for you, or you say, no, I think you can't start with your passions?
First of all, you have to discover what your passions are. And sometimes they're boiling under the surface. And one of the challenges is separating avocations from passions. So I'm passionate about golf. Does that mean I should become a pro golf player? God help us. No. But I'm passionate about it. But that's the difference between what I'm passionate about, where I really believe there's an opportunity to have a significant impact on the world, versus what an advocation is that I'm particularly excited about. And so I think that the unlocking potential and the opportunity is one that if we stop and think about it and take a breath, most leaders want to get there, and we just don't have the tools to do it.
Some of the questions I have are directly related, but they get off a little bit in a tangent. I mean, this is one of them, but it's directly related. You'll see what I'm saying. What extent do you think that the pandemic or the remote hybrid work environment did accelerate this buy-in crisis you mentioned? I mean, that's been 5 years ago now. It's hard to even quantify that. It seems like before, you got to measure time in before and after COVID, don't you? But so you said it's been declining for 10 years. Well, 5 of that was in the pandemic. So what role did it play?
I think it played a huge role because it caused people to stop the pattern of getting up at the crack of dawn and getting the kids ready for school and packing lunches and shipping them off and running to work and et cetera, and gave them time to think about, what do I want from work and what is the meaning of work for me? And I think people have come back with a couple of different answers there. One is, I want to work somewhere where the work means something to me. And we call that alignment with purpose. Why bother doing this work is an obvious question that I'm not sure all organizations are answering. So that's number one. Number two is, people said, hey, I want an opportunity to learn and grow. How does this position offer me an opportunity to learn and grow? Does the organization support that? And number three is, I want my voice to matter. I want somebody to ask about my experience, as opposed to just telling me what to do. So I think that the pandemic gave people time to reflect on what's important.
If I'm a leader, how do I know? I mean, like, there could be engagement scores and different things like that, but I want Dave's rubric, so to speak, on how do you know if you're in a buy-in crisis?
If you see you're setting objectives and regularly missing them, if there are meetings that seem to go on, if you feel like you're having too many meetings, I had a CEO say to me the other day, I met with the IT department and they were talking about their budget for next year, and I never realized what our turnover rate was until they told me how many new onboardings they are doing. So if you are losing key talent despite having what you think are decent wages, competitive wages. So late meetings, losing talent, missing objectives, all should make you stop and say, there could be an opportunity here to do better. And I think that leaders know that. I think that intuitively leaders say, man, if I just had time for the important stuff, that's another indicator. If I had time for the important stuff, we could do so much more.
But isn't much of what you describe, I mean, like, you could always, like, usually most organizations put their objectives just beyond their reach. So there's always going to be many objectives that you don't achieve. But is it something that you just kind of know when you see it? I mean, like, dude, we have an engagement problem. It's just not working. The people are not bought in. They can't quote the mission when I ask them. They're not listening. I don't know. I mean, is there a better way? I mean, something that's just like the litmus test, for damn sure.
Yeah, we actually have a free online assessment that you can take as a leader, answer the questions yourself, and see if you have a buy-in problem. But equally important, because you don't know what you don't know, is to have your team take a team assessment. Again, free online, buyinbook.com. Have your team take the assessment and then compare notes, because one of the key ideas of the buy-in advantage is collecting the best thinking from your team, because you can't see what you can't see. So if we had time to pause and contemplate our navel and think about, what could be better, you'd probably say, yeah, we may have a buy-in crisis, but we're go, doing meetings, answering questions, responding to this fire, and we don't have time for the important stuff.
Okay, so the book outlines several critical ingredients, 7, I should say. Hold on. it outlines 7 critical ingredients for sustainable buy-in. Could you talk to those real quick? Just remind the audience. I think we talked to them a little bit last time, but my question for you is, could you share 1 or 2 of those that you think are underappreciated right now by most leaders?
Yeah, I think one that's underappreciated is all of us know more than any of us is a principle that I think is really important because if you have the most experience in an organization, it's reasonable to walk around and saying, I've got the answer. And so when we get trained to give people answers, that's when we get in trouble. And somebody will come to us innocently and say, hey, Al, what do you want me to do about? And if you give them an answer, then you've just cut off buy-in because you've given them permission not to participate and you've cut off your opportunity to learn as a leader. And so we like to think about the second question is the second answer is the most important answer. So ask them, what is it that you think we ought to do? And they're going to say, I think we ought to fill in the blank. Your response to that, if you respond with judgment and say, hey, well, that's a good idea, but why don't you try this? You've again just cut off buy-in. So it's that temptation not to answer that we see allows for buy-in to be created. And what great leaders do is they respond instead of saying, hey, that probably won't work. What they do is say, hey, what else did you consider? Or what let you know that that was the right answer? When we're armed with that information, we then know how this person thinks, how we can help them grow, and what it is our experience tells us is important they may not have considered.
So say it's the wrong answer, though.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe there's a better answer. Now, you want them to learn. You got to ask the questions. But when do you ultimately make the pivot to say, well, let's try this or something? How do you lead them into that area?
Yeah. And this is the unpacking that great leaders do. If you hear the voice in your head going, wow, that's wrong, then what I'd ask you to do is unpack, Al, and say, what is the checklist in your head item that this is violating? What is this missing? It's violating some basic criteria in your head. And so what you have the opportunity to do is just say, you know what? That's an interesting answer. What if you also consider this criteria? How would it change your answer? And allow the person to benefit from your experience, which is expressed through the criteria you share with them, as opposed to saying, that's wrong.
Very good. Very good. All right. Would you mind, just for the listeners, hitting the other 6, just so that they're reminded of your 7 critical ingredients?
Yeah. So let's, you asked about warning signs earlier as well. So the opposite is going to be true for what we can do. But what we see is meetings starting late, key objectives being missed, people doing exactly what they're asked and no more, engagement scores declining, etc. And here's what challenges us as leaders. We think that money is what motivates people. And money has a half-life of about 3 weeks. So would I appreciate a bonus or a raise? Sure. Give me a bonus or a raise and I'm appreciative. But that's not why I do what I do. And that's why one of the things that we say is that great leaders ask questions. They don't tell, they ask questions. And they ask people's opinions and engage people. So right now we're in the midst of budget season, right? At many organizations. So what do? Do we give people a bunch of numbers and say, here's your budget? Or do we say, what budget do you request for this year? What a crazy way to approach people's and unlocking people's potential. Instead, why don't we say, hey, what have we discovered that is an unaddressed need? What are we hearing from our customers right now? What are things that we could stop doing altogether and have that conversation and have it outside the realm of numbers and have it with potential and then work backwards into numbers? And so
that doesn't happen that often.
No, I know it doesn't. So you asked, what are the 7 ingredients? Here they are. Yeah. It's harness the power of collective genius. It's everybody is smarter. Everybody together is smarter than any of us individually. Wisdom of crowds.
Okay.
Second is adopt a drama-free problem-solving system. It's not my idea and your idea. It's not right and wrong. It's how do we generate options and then select from different options where we solicit options from everybody. And we have techniques in the book, which basically is to be very specific about the question we're asking, give people the data ahead of time, allow them to consider it on their own, and then get into small groups. Because honestly, when we're in a meeting of 8 people or 10 people, you're not going to hear from everybody, and you don't have time to. It's such a waste of time to have those large meetings and try to have discussions. The third, which we mentioned, is focus on questions instead of answers to allow people to learn and for you to learn how they think. Fourth, 3 is greater than 7 is our new rule. 3 is greater than 7. Prioritize the few things that really count. If people are being asked to work on more than about 3 things, then you're absolutely overwhelming them. And you're asking them to have to choose which ones they're going to work on, which means when you follow up, you're going to be frustrated. The fifth, slow down to include everyone. This is counterintuitive, but sometimes if we want to speed up, we have to slow down. And sixth, your role as a leader, effective meetings, impactful conversations, your job is to set containers, create processes that drive engagement. And then finally is if you don't have a compelling purpose and clear values, and I don't mean 12 values on the wall, I mean a couple of values that everybody lives by, really memorialize those values and compelling purpose and use it in the interview process, decision-making process, prioritization process, review process, and promotion process. It's that simple.
Simple to listen to, hard to implement. What makes it so hard for people then? Why can't leaders abide by the 7? Is it the almighty dollar? It's the next quarter for results. You don't have time. What is it?
I think that, nobody is knocking on the door saying, pay attention to leadership. They're knocking on the door saying, we need to solve this right now. We have this client issue. Where are you on the metrics? Where are you on the forecast? Corporate wants to know. Your boss wants to know. Nobody is saying to you, when is your time for leadership and what are you doing about buy-in? So one of the effective things that we see leaders do is to put on their calendar an appointment with themselves to focus on, for example, prioritization or leveraging my team and understanding where they are and how I can support them better.
Is there a good time to do that? I mean, every time's a good time, but I mean, do you set aside time? Like what's Dave's day look like? Do you have a day where you say, look, this is my think day, and I'm going to make sure I'm making calls to solicit feedback on critical items and then putting them into a project plan, whatever. What's your secret?
Yeah. Al, because of the amount of travel that we're doing to meet with leaders who want to know how to implement this, frankly, airplanes are my quiet time. Airplanes are the time that I have time to reflect because I go over the notes and see what needs to be done. And every single week, like a lot of firms do, we go over every single client as a team and identify themes of what needs to be done and make sure that we're providing what they need. By listening to that, I'm also able to understand what my team needs. So I wish there was a silver bullet.
But you got to find your time, is what you're telling me. You got to find your time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I'm on a lot of airplanes myself, and I'm still amazed by how many people are watching movies. I spend the whole time working. I don't know if that's good or bad, but yeah. Hey, so you also have 3 pillars of high-performing organizations: inspired people, smart outcomes, and empowered teams. What was that?
I found this on the web.
Oh, we get Siri. Siri heard us.
Siri just loves to answer your questions, but you know what? Siri, like any LLM, doesn't have the ability to discriminate between good answers and bad answers. So let me ask you to ask again, and I'll try to do a decent job.
Yeah, no. So you also have 3 pillars of high-performing organizations you've outlined: inspired people, smart outcomes, and empowered teams. I'm curious, you could have went with a lot of different areas. You could have went with systems. You could have went with, many other things. But how did you arrive at that trifecta?
It's based on a model of studying a couple of hundred organizations, meeting with a couple of thousand leaders and looking for the common patterns on those organizations that are game changing. And what we see 100% of the time in game changing organization is they are really clear, as are their people, on their compelling purpose. Why bother doing this? It's never about money. It's always about making some fundamental change in the world and providing value. So compelling purpose occurs 100% of the time in game changing organizations. The second piece of the model, entrusted people. It's not a couple of go-to people. It's people. Everybody is equally armed with what it is we're trying to do, what our current priorities are, and how we're measuring it. And then the third is aligned actions, which is the horizontal synergy. We perfect in organizations silos that operate really well. It's much harder to have those silos cooperate and say, you know what? For the good of the business, if we want to change stuff 18 months from now and get off the treadmill, we need to focus on A, B, and C. So that's where it came from. Studying people and watching amazing organizations.
And how do you measure every one of those inspired people? How do you know if they're inspired? Smart outcomes, empowered teams?
Yeah,
What's the
great
measurement?
question. So here's a question we ask. We ask leaders, so think about your last 2 weeks. How many times did someone come into your office to say, who doesn't report directly to you, to say, hey, I've got an idea for we can do this less, or here's an idea for what we can do more of. So the measure of that is individual initiative. So it's not just waiting around for engagement scores. It's how many times did people come forward and offer individual initiative. The second measure is focused effort. And this is simply, was there any slack in the system? Did we waste any effort? Classic example is, well, we put in a new CRM, but the teams told us they didn't have time for training. That's a great example of wasted effort. So one department not coordinating with another department what's going on, wasted effort. And the third is look at the kinds of questions that are coming up to your executive team and ask yourself, could these have been handled at a lower level? Where did we miss the opportunity? So the evidence is handling issues, spotting opportunities at the first level of the organization. And look, I like to answer questions and offer smart answers as much as the next person. But if all the issues coming to your executive team are not deserving of the experience or the attention, or if they're getting in the way of the really important thing, we've missed an opportunity. So how could we have had this done at the first level or second level of the organization as opposed to coming up to the executive team? So 3 markers: individual initiative, focused effort, and decisions being made at the front lines.
Conversely, how do you know if you are operating within a yes culture? And I ask that, because I presume most leaders wouldn't want to be characterized as driving yes people. So what would convince them or suggest that, hey, maybe we do have a problem here?
That's a tough one because it requires you to step back and ask yourself a couple of questions. One is, in meetings, how many times in the past week did I hear somebody take the absolute contrary opinion to what I said? And how did I respond when they took that opinion? It takes the ability to go to people that you trust to ask them, if it were possible that this is a yes organization, what's evidence that supports that? And ask people to give you feedback. And the third thing is, I think, to go to your team and say, do you know what? One of the things that really concerns me is we might become, or we might be in the process of being, a yes organization, and it's the last thing I want. And ask for people to help and say, would you please help me remember whenever we get in violent agreement about something, that one of us takes the opposite viewpoint and just asks the question, hey, if the opposite were true, what would that look like? And that's hard
I like that last
to do.
piece. Seeking dissent.
Yes.
One thing that again, I think we all are guilty of not making time for it, but there are times where I have a meeting and then before we end, I seek dissent in the same way that you just outlined it.
Nice.
Why would this go wrong? Or why am I, the naysayer? What would the naysayer say? So it gives permission in the room to say, well, this could break because of X, Y, or Z. I think that's good.
Yeah.
I like it.
And the other thing here is it's really important when we are tackling a tough decision or we're setting up a strategic plan is to explicitly state our beliefs and align on our beliefs. Because at the end of the day, our beliefs will drive the actions. And beliefs are what we want to say, you know what, I believe that capital spending is going to significantly increase next year because of X, Y, Z. And if that's a belief, let's all align on it and either agree that that's the case or not. And if we align on it, then ask someone to monitor that belief and just check in monthly and say, hey, is the data still supporting this? Because too often the beliefs are the foundation on which we made a decision. The data around the beliefs will change, but it's often too late to respond because we haven't gone in and checked in on those beliefs. And I learned that valuable lesson during COVID when, we had no idea what was going to happen, which is interesting because it's as if before we knew exactly what was going to happen. And of course, today, another time of uncertainty, we have no idea what's going to happen, but we can make beliefs about what's going to happen and then act on those beliefs and keep checking in on those beliefs. But I love your contrary question. It's a great question.
So let's dive a little further into practical tools or techniques. One of your techniques that you continually refer to is asking questions instead of providing answers.
Yeah.
It seems a little bit intuitive, though, although I don't think people do it all the time. So it's worth reminding. But can you share a story from either your work or a recent event where that shift made the big difference to kind of push it home?
Yeah, one of the stories that we tell in the book is about a great CEO named Jeff Edison, who came into the senior offsite session that I was facilitating, and he said, "Hey guys, before we get started, I'm thinking about adding somebody new to the team." And I looked at the faces of the people, and it was kind of like your son or daughter when you bring home a second baby. It's like, wait a minute, what happened to me? And I said, "Jeff, have you thought about this?" He said, "Oh yeah, I've given it a lot of thought." And I said, "Before you tell us the name, could you tell us how you know this person is the right person?" And he said, "Yeah." I was basically asking him for the checklist in his head. And he said, "It's someone who has cred in the organization, somebody who works hard, and somebody who thinks differently than we do." And then I said to the team, "Take a minute on your own. What would you add to this list of criteria if we were going to bring somebody else onto the team?" And they thought about it, and they added 3 or 4 more criteria. And I said, "Okay, armed with a 6 or 7 criteria, what names come to mind?" And they put up about 10 names on the board. And I said to Jeff, "Jeff, do you want to share with us who you want to add to the team?" He said, "No, I want to think about it." And that criteria list that they created became the guiding principles for the interview questions that they ask of potential executives and how they evaluate people before promotions.
Thank you for that. I do remember that one. Let's talk about prioritization and focus. To be honest with you, this one could be one of my derailment factors. Not the focus, but the prioritization. Because I feel like, it's a character flaw. I feel like I can get anything done. And I always think I can get it done faster than you would expect to get it done. I mean, it's a challenge for me. But the way I kind of look at things, like if I have a virtual team of 10,000 people, I got 10,000 person years. We should be able to do some amazing stuff with that, right? So tell me, how do you choose which matters most to really get in? And I do think in terms of threes, don't get me wrong, but I think things can be done much faster than even maybe possible. How do you help organizations choose which priorities matter most? And what mistakes do you see leaders make when they overload their teams with goals?
Yeah, let's start with the second first. So what do I see happen? I remember at an executive 2 levels down in a New York City company that said, they're in luxury goods, said to me, "You know what? I just pray that the CEO doesn't ask me about project number 7 because I've been given 20 different ideas I'm supposed to follow up on, and I picked number 4, 12, and 18. And so I just hope it's not me that get called on, and I hope that the CEO doesn't ask about number 7. So the downside of having too many priorities is, one, things really worth doing well generally require more than one department or one person to get done. And if those 2 departments or 2 people are not aligned on what's important, it's going to be really hard to get stuff done. So the more you overwhelm a team with priorities, the less effective they're going to be, or the more they retreat into silos. And silos is not where work really happens. It's important. So how do you set priorities? I think you begin on the long term. If the leaders in the room are not focused on fundamentally changing the business model and results, nobody is. If we're focused on this year's sales or this quarter's sales, God bless us. Of course, we need to focus on this quarter's sales. But if we're not asking the question, what can we do that's different or stop doing that we're doing now in order to significantly change results 18 months from now? It's the difference between Starbucks saying, we're going to add a new Frappuccino flavor because it's Halloween, versus saying, you know what? Mobile ordering probably changed our business. Mobile ordering took years to put into place because it involved so many pieces of the organization. And so the question, if leaders are not looking far down the road and setting priorities on those things, nobody is. So I would set your priorities by where you are in the organization, take the longest look you can possibly make and say, what's critical for me to get done now to address those priorities that will really change the business? Because if we're all focused on the very short term, getting this proposal out the door, and that's all we're focused on, then nothing will ever change. It is a hamster wheel.
But so I got a follow up though. Generational and cultural shifts. How do you think Gen Z's expectations are reshaping what buy-in means today? And is there a difference between older generations and how they respond to the techniques you're proposing?
Yeah, I think that so there's this myth that I'm going to make up as my story. I'll own it as a story. That older generations say you've got to earn the right to be there because that's the way they were trained. You've got to earn the right to be in the corner office or have the title. And then and only then you can give answers. Until then, sit down, do your work, roll up your shirt sleeves and get it done. And if you attempt to use that method on a Gen Z, I guarantee turnover because it's violating their desire to learn continuously and to have their voice heard. And so I think that people of older generations, and I consider myself an old white dude, so I'm part of that old generation, struggle with well, wait a minute. You need to listen and learn your way before you can share an opinion. But the fact is, people bring experience to work on day one. And your question is, how do I tap into that experience? The question for the leader is, if you truly believe all of us are smarter than any, how do I tap into that experience on day one? So Gen Z is looking for their voice to be heard. So how are you going to listen to new employees and frontline employees in a thoughtful way? Two, what are the opportunities that you have to allow people to learn? Whether it's a brown bag lunch about how to get a loan, whether it's a brown bag lunch about a particular department or division in our company, whether it's a brown bag lunch about a new technology and how we might use it. How do we give people an opportunity to learn and grow?
So you've talked about measuring, you've talked about, what leaders should do, but how do you recognize buy-in? Meaning you've been clear to say, look, don't fall back on monetary incentives. So what do you suggest, or how would you suggest leaders recognize or reward employees in the ways that reinforce the buy-in you're suggesting?
I think your opportunities for recognition are manyfold. It's in one-on-one meetings. It's in small team meetings. It's in town hall meetings. It's in personal notes to employees. I think that a really important technique that's often overlooked is when you recognize behavior that is the right behavior, tie it to a value or tie it to the purpose and show appreciation to a person by saying, you know what, when you fill in the blank, it really talked to our value of integrity. And I appreciate that because I am guilty, because my team will tell you I am guilty of not doing a great job of showing appreciation. When I recognize behavior, I just say, yeah, that was really great. And I don't take the time to say, how did I let them know that that was really great? And that currency of recognition, whether it's a note, a sticky, a note to their house, a mention at a team huddle, that goes so much further than money and says to everybody else, this is what's important. This is how you get recognized because we all want recognition. We all want recognition.
So public recognition. Do you risk inadvertently alienating those that you're not recognizing publicly though?
Ow. It is the star syndrome. Yes. So here's what often happens. A small company, a medium-sized company will hire somebody from, Amazon, and they'll make a big deal out of it. Hey, everybody, I'm really excited. We've got this person from Amazon coming. And they keep promoting this new person like it's the salvation of the organization, which makes everybody else wonder, well, wait a minute, what about the rest of us? And so if you're always recognizing the same people, or if you're only recognizing leaders and not the people who are carrying the brunt of the work on the front lines, you are going to get resentment. And you're better off not saying anything. So ask yourself, what have I done to recognize people on the front lines? Am I recognizing a variety of people? What's my source of information about who we should recognize? Do I ask my team leads, hey, who's done something that we should recognize? And then how do we recognize them? Some people don't want to be called out in public. That's fine. Then recognize them the way they want to be recognized.
It's always occurred to me that the first line manager, front line manager, and their teams are the most important piece of the business. Sounds like you would concur with that.
When I worked serving technology, the hospitality industry, the general manager of a hotel is one position that I would never want because the image we had is that they are caught between something called an asset manager that actually owns the property and the brand, which is running reservations. And we always had this picture of the general manager having their face caught in an elevator door, being smushed on one side by the asset manager saying, give me more money, more return. And the brand saying, delight the guests, sell more rooms, delight the guests. And
Right.
that frontline manager, oh my goodness, they deserve much more recognition than we give them credit for. And they're the people to listen to and ask questions like, hey, I'm really curious. If you were in my job, what would you be considering? What's really important? What are the opportunities we're missing? What are we doing well that we want to make sure we don't lose track of? And ask them.
What's the biggest pushback you typically hear? I mean, when you're going to talk to all these companies, you're talking about asking instead of telling. What is the resistance you face most?
I don't have time. Yeah, that's great. I don't have time.
You don't. They just don't have time to do it. They got to get to end of job. So
right. It is, the pushback is really about what they believe the job of the leader is.
Because, how do you counter that statement? If I don't have time.
Yeah. So a question: how much time do you have? How much time do you have? And I remember early in my executive career in Silicon Valley, I remember I put in a call to the CEO of Hewlett Packard, and I thought, well, I wonder if I'll ever hear back. Before the end of the day, I heard back, and I was floored. I was stunned. And I said, I really appreciate the call back. Can you tell me about what allowed you to call? And he goes, yes, return all calls within a day. It's a really important part of the operation. That's how I learn. And it just struck me that we all have the same amount of time. The question is, how do we choose to use it? And so time is a choice. And that's really humbling because it's much easier for me to say, well, I had to do this report and that report, and I got to answer this and I got to do that. But actually, we have a choice about how we use our time. And that causes sometimes leaders to go, yeah, I might use it differently.
I would have a little bit, I get it. I mean, makes sense, but I would have a little bit of a different answer in that you use those folks around you, like the 10,000 people I talked to you. Amazing. Imagine 10,000 person years working on your behalf. That's amazing. That delegation versus taking it all on yourself.
Yes.
And having them just execute on your behalf. I mean, you'd want them to execute on the team's behalf, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
You think that would be magical.
Except,
that's why they always say leaders, you want leaders to have followers that are following you, not because you are signing their paycheck, but because they want to. If you're walking, and what's the saying? If you're walking and you look back and nobody's following, you're just taking a walk,
And that was one of the things that caused me to write this book. There's a leader of a very successful healthcare company. And he said, you know what? I feel like I'm leading this company. I'm walking up the mountain. When I turn around and look down the mountain, they're way, way behind me. And it's like, how come they're not keeping up? And this book is about how to allow everyone to keep up with you. But when you talk about delegation, one of the things I hear is, I don't have time to delegate. I said, well, tell me about that. I can do it quicker myself. My people are too busy. And I hear all these excuses about delegation when in fact, delegating makes the other person feel really good if they know that you trust them to do what's important. And there are only certain things that meet the criteria of both being really important and you can do well. And that's where you should be spending your time.
You know, Dave, I did have an issue though one time. I don't know if it's counter to this story or not, but it was a gentleman that was on my team. The good news is you'll hear in this very quick story that he was willing to open up to me. You know, we went for a beer at some point in time and I said, look, I don't understand what's taken so long. We can get this done much faster. What is the issue? And his answer to me, of course, he'd had a couple of beers by this, and he was like, Al, not everybody is you. They're just not. And they're not going to put in that time that you're expecting. And I think you have to be okay with it because they're not you. Now, that's not me patting myself on the back. That kind of shocked me, to be honest with you, because I was like, we're in this battle together and you want to win. And when you want to win, you put everything you got. But then that told me, like to your earlier points, I don't know, then maybe we're not all seeing the same mission. Maybe we don't have full buy-in. Maybe this is just a job to some people.
So first of all, I think it's a great story and the opportunity is to ask questions. Well, I appreciate all that you do. I'm really curious. What is taking the most time that's on your plate right now? Where are you putting most of your effort? The story that I'm not willing to work as hard as you, or whatever the story was, suggests to me that what you're asking them to prioritize takes more work than is humanly possible or that they're willing to do. But yet I'm assuming they're working hard. I'm assuming they're a good person. So I'm curious to know, what are you working on? What's taking that time? And really understand what their experience is.
That's fair. And it was a good person. He was a hard worker. So a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up. But so in terms of driving your methodologies one-on-one, it would seem pretty straightforward. But how do you scale this across an organization? Think of IBM, 280,000
Yeah.
people. How do you scale it across an organization of that size?
Yeah, great question. So there are two ways. The traditional answer is, well, we'll start at the top and we'll get the executive committee to adopt these principles, and then they'll have it in their bones and they will be teachers, which is wonderful. That can also take years and years and years to filter it all the way down to 280,000 people. But what I would suggest to you is there are tens of thousands of leaders in IBM who can say, you know what? I'm going to start adopting these practices for my business unit. I can't control what people are doing in some other geography or some other business unit, but I can make choices about my time and what I'm doing. So I'm going to put some of these ideas to work where I am. And I'll do it in order to get better results. I'll do it in order to take the load off me as a leader so I have more time to focus on what's important. And I'll do it because that's what people are looking for. And the less turnover we have, the more experience we have on the team, and the better solutions we can come up with.
Okay.
So just begin.
Just begin. Yeah, you got to start someplace. It's just like anything. That's my motto: is just show up. You show up, and good things happen.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I wouldn't get any exercise in. I just say, "Oh, I'm too tired today." I just show up, and then it turns out, it works out. That's how it does it. Looking ahead, you've shared a number of stories in the book. Which story or case study are you most proud of, and why?
Yeah, there's a man who came to me, and was frankly a conversation I didn't remember that well. And he said, hey, look, I'm being squeezed to generate more EBITDA out of my business, and was running a Cadillac dealership. And he said, I've cut expenses. I've looked at every corner. I've cut corner. We've stopped doing things. I still want to provide a service I'm proud of, but I don't know what else to do. What else can I do? And I asked him, I said, Jeff, what's your turnover? What was your employee turnover? He goes, I said, for the last year. He said, let me go get the data. He came back and said it was somewhere north of 50%. And I said, your opportunity to generate increased profits is to reduce the turnover. And that is an opportunity to remind people why it's worth doing, and set up an organized way to listen to people and allow them to participate in what gets done, and allow them to participate in decisions that affect them. So that's what we call in the book done with, not done to. He came up to me a year later and said, it worked. And I said, what worked? And he said, I was able to generate another $1 million in the business because I employed the things you talked about in order to hear people and allow them to participate in creating great together. And that is a huge amount of satisfaction for me, because that was an organization unlocking potential in people. It takes time, it takes intention. Frankly, it doesn't take a lot of money. It takes time and it takes intention.
Makes sense. Hey, so where do you think we're going? 5 to 10 years from now, where will employee buy-in, or how will it evolve? Especially when you're talking about remote work, you've got AI. We talked about that to begin the call. Hybrid workplaces, you name it. Where do you think we're going, and what do we need to consider as we go forward?
Yeah, I think that we're going, first of all, I think that we are distracted by LLM and AI can be a distraction if we let it be a distraction, because we think it is the answer. It is an important tool. How are we engaging our teams and people in using that technology to everybody's benefit? How are we doing training on LLM and AI? How are we doing specific applications to learn about our people and provide leadership tools for our people? And so I think the trend says, look, unless we do something different, we're going to see a continued decline in employee engagement, continued decline in buy-in. However, that creates an opportunity for leaders willing to do something different. If you want a competitive edge, it's pretty low-hanging fruit in how you decide to treat people and how much you focus on buy-in, because you're going to have the pick of the best talent, because you're doing something other organizations are not. And I think that the more that you have organizations that stand out based on buy-in, the more other organizations are going to go, what are they doing? How can I learn from that? What can we do differently? So I have hope that there is a new generation of leaders, that leaders are curious about how to do better. Leaders are confident in their strategy, they're confident in their people, and they know something is missing.
All right, that leaves me with one question before the next. The next one will be the last one. But if you could leave, or if you could leave one takeaway for every leader in the audience here, what would that be?
It would be, remember, very simply, all of us are smarter than any of us. How do I tap into the collective genius? How do I tap into the wisdom of the crowd for what the important issues are?
Nice. All right. So here's my question. And I want to, speaking of tapping in, I want to tap into Dave, the coach. So specifically, I just took over a new team. We had to deal with a lot of changes up front, but I'm having an offsite here in a couple of weeks. So we got like a day and a half, say. If you were to hold an offsite for a new team, given all you're writing about, all your knowledge, all the CEOs you're working with, what do you think the agenda of that offsite should look like?
Now, what I would be curious to know is from the people who are going to attend the offsite, I would ask them a couple of questions right now. I would say, if you were an outside observer looking at our organization, what are we doing particularly well? And if you're an outside observer to our organization, what are the biggest obstacles getting in our way of great? What are the biggest obstacles? So if I know what is it we should not screw up and what it is that's getting in the way of us being great, they're going to give me basically a map of what the world looks like to them. And if I can just organize that data, you will then, as a leader, call on your own experience to go, aha, you know what? The agenda ought to look like A, B, and C based on how they see the world.
Don't you think we should make sure we agree on the mission first, though?
Then I would ask the question, can you describe our department or division's mission in your own words? And I would look for the alignment in that description. You know, one of the things we talked about in part 1 and 2 is before we begin an engagement, we go interview the executives and we say, hey, could you tell us what the most important priorities are? What's our mission? And what are the values you see in practice? Generally, the words people use are different or the ideas are different, which means each team is getting different instruction. And so absolutely, if you have a question of, do we align on the mission, ask them how they would describe the mission in their own words. And if that is not lining up, what a great opportunity to say, hey, let's get it aligned on our mission.
I think I'm going to have to be clever in that question. Just because I've been pushing the mission so hard, they may think it's a Darwin test. And say, yeah, here's the mission. No, okay, well, I'm asking you, you know, this is a free zone, you know, safe zone where what do you think the mission should be or could be?
Well, if you feel like you've already pushed it and you believe they've heard you, then a different question comes to mind, Al.
Yeah.
I would ask them, I would say to them something like, you know, we've said that the mission is blank. Are there any unintended consequences of using this as our mission? And do you think any parts of this mission require clarification for your team? So ask them in the third person about the clarity of the mission to them, the meaning of the mission to them, and ask them if there are unintended consequences. So that's like your question of what's the contrary.
All right, man. I knew it was going to be good, right? 1 hour flies by like a matter of minutes. And I wasn't even sure if I had the right questions or whatever. But, you know, once again, very good chat, man. I love chatting with you. This is stuff that everybody should prioritize. I don't think that they often do, but I guarantee you we're going to get a ton of hits. So I appreciate you, Dave, for being here again.
Al, thank you for having me. It's always great. And I learn every single time with each question. Thanks for the challenge.
Thank you so much. And listeners, I got to hit it again. Thank you. I greatly appreciate you being here. Hit us on almartintalksdata@gmail.com. If you have a comment, and rate us wherever you're listening to us. Thank you for being here. Talk to you next time. Bye-bye.